All right. You're listening into another episode of America Stories, but we're pivoting to our Indiana stories that we do from time to time, that we used to do all the time. And the reason we're doing that is because about a year ago, actually, interesting backstory of how this happened. I had the Murder Sheet podcast on as they joined me today, Anya Kane and Kevin Greenlee, the lovely Anya Kane and the stoic Kevin Greenlee, we'll say that. Anyway, so we had a lot of listeners last year asking a lot of questions about the Delphi case. I think they're just casual interest in it, probably not as deep as some people are into it. And we recorded an episode. We did a two-parter. I think we recorded it in one session, though. I released it in two parts, where we talked about just the case in general. Then I believe 3 days later, there was an arrest made, if I remember how this happened. So we talked about the case in detail before any arrest was made. Then before I could even release the episode, an arrest was made. So then we've kind of, because of interest and a lot of questions and comments, we come back in as soon as we receive more information. And that's exactly what happened earlier this week. So yeah, the Murder Sheet podcast joins me, of course. You guys, I'm excited to talk to you again. I wish it was ever better circumstances, but it's always nice when you take the time to catch up with me. You're all over TV. You're everywhere, and you take the time to talk to this guy. So that means a lot.
We love talking with you, Jeff. You always ask such great questions, and you have a real grasp of the case. So it's always delightful for us, too.
Speaking of grasp of the case, you guys definitely have by far more than that than me. Whenever I hear anything, I think it's Anya I speak with. I always say, "Hey, how significant is this?" You're like, "Big, huge, whatever." You'll tell me. And this week was definitely significant, and we'll get into some of the details of that. The people listening. To start off, though, the defense. So walk me through what happened here, because this information was available for what, just a short amount of time originally. I'm not an expert by any means, but how does something like this go about, where this information comes out, then it's sealed, or what happened?
Well, the defense on Monday filed this document, and they did not request that it be made confidential. They did not request that it be sealed. And so it was open for anybody who wanted to access it. We actually received a copy of it from the clerk of the court. She emailed it to us.
And she didn't do anything wrong because, again, it wasn't sealed.
Yeah.
And so...
some people are wondering if it should have been sealed, given that a lot of details, a lot of names. It's since been we've heard that it's been sealed, possibly by the judge, although not to be flippant, but the horse is out of the barn, that's shutting the barn door at this point, because the media has been all over it. It's been extensively reported on. And, so the information is definitely out there.
Seemingly, and this is my opinion, I guess it's my podcast, I can be more opinionated than you guys are pretty neutral and respective, I guess I could say, on yours, investigative integrity, which is great. But seemingly to me, purposely, possibly, I guess, done strategically, in my opinion. It could be a strategic move like that. We'll get into some of the details, but to me, how weird is this that this didn't wait till trial?
Oh, that's such a good question. It to me, it's a little bit weird, and I'll explain why specifically. The Franks memorandum really includes a lot of the really interesting information, and it essentially outlines the defense's entire case. Who they think did the murders, as opposed to their client, Richard Allen. And what's interesting about that is the Franks memorandum really only has to get into, where law enforcement messed up so the PCA can be thrown out. Probable cause affidavit for the search warrant. And that's what the Franks motion is meant to do. So all of this stuff about who they think did it is, not necessarily fundamental to achieving the goal of saying, hey, law enforcement lied about this. Here's why the search warrant should be tossed. So that seems a bit unusual to me. How about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised that they went into so much detail in spelling out this alternate theory. Yeah. But certainly behind the scenes, the defense has been deposing witnesses, asking witnesses questions, and so it's not a surprise to people who've been a part of the case.
Yeah, To me, though, just from watching a lot of televised cases and court, particularly court events before, this is like a defense that would be laid out in a trial, especially some of the revealings that there are people that they can, we'll just say it, people that they say did it, right? Like normally that would be something that's kind of laid out in court. Like not Richard Allen didn't do this, but this person did it. And this has all been laid out in front of us months before this even goes to trial. So to me, that seemed very unique.
Yeah, there's so much about the Delphi case that is just kind of, you don't really see it in other cases. And it makes it hard for us because we always like to compare things to other cases and say, okay, well, this is somewhat like, what happened in this case. But unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are singular about Delphi.
And certainly it puts the people who were named in a rather uncomfortable position because suddenly they're being associated with the murder of these two young children. And that certainly it must have been a shocking thing for them to wake up to Monday morning.
Yeah. Just going into it a little bit here. So some of the things that we had not, I'm more than certain that you guys had heard a lot of these things that were released today beforehand, but did not share. And a lot of other individuals as well that have been investigating the case. But one of the things that was made a little bit more clear is the murder scene itself had been a pretty closed lip, like what the environment was like there, what it happened, what the bodies were like and all that. And that was revealed in this document to an extent as far as the positioning. There was actually, it was on court TV. It wasn't an episode that you guys were on, but they actually had a presentation of a layout of how the bodies were staged. And a lot of this information was new. And along with that, it was they went into greater detail about it, but just to start off, how the bodies were positioned. And then they actually clarified something that we had all been discussing, where the location of the phone was. So this is something that I think was always wondered, where was this phone at? Was it recorded, tossed off to the side? It certainly didn't seem like whoever's being accused of committing the murder knew about it. And I think this kind of solidifies that because the phone was stuck up underneath one of the victims' bodies, correct?
Yes.
Or hidden underneath or laid on. I mean, I don't know how to describe it exactly, but
my understanding it was under one of the bodies.
Yeah, and we hadn't known that really before, and I think that was something that was new from earlier this week, excuse me.
Yeah, there was a number of details about the crime scene that had not been publicly confirmed. Also, it was mentioned that one of the victims had been dressed in the clothes that the other victim had been wearing. That's certainly an odd detail that certainly must have taken the killer or killers a fair amount of time and effort to do. And you can't help but wonder why they did that.
Yeah, I don't want to go into I'll just give the basic details real quickly and get it out of the way because they're kind of gruesome and to be quite frank, make me uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Having a father of 3 daughters. So one of the victims, Libby, was found nude, blood spots and blood drippings seen all over Libby's body. No blood sprayed or dripped onto the leaves or tree near Libby's head, which basically made it look like staged right off the side of the right I don't know how to describe it. Directly in line with the tree, I guess I'm going to say. They also determined the wound to the neck. Abby was found fully clothed, dressed in Libby's sweatshirt and jeans, like you just brought that up. Abby was found wearing 2 bras. Strange. No blood on Abby's clothes, very little blood on the body. And Libby's phone was found, phone and shoe found under Abby's lower back. So we just talked about that and knocked that out of the way. Uncomfortable, but it's important to the pieces together. So yeah, the phone was revealed underneath one of the body's victims, but like you said, 2 different both of them handled completely different. And then some of the things that were used were tree limbs, correct, to cover up the bodies.
Yes, that's correct. That's one of the strange signatures that seem to be at the scene.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where we can look at it like a signature. We could kind of go down a rabbit hole as much as we want onto how significant it is. We obviously we weren't there. We didn't see it. But some people are saying, hey, they just use the limbs to cover them up. Some people are saying they're strategically placed, symbolically, I guess you could say. And we'll go into that a little bit here. So with that being said, there's been some things that have been brought on that document based on just the crime scene itself.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I guess it wasn't really a good question. It was a statement with a question, like statement question mark.
I know, no, that's
I am
correct.
Ron Burgundy question mark sort of thing. But yeah, so this document reveals, and I hadn't heard of this group, and maybe you guys had or hadn't, that there could have been a cult-like setting that took or event that took place motivationally charged this murder. I'll let you guys describe that. You have probably more comfortable than I am spitballing something like that.
It's a doozy. So what the defense's theory of the case essentially is that a group of Odinists following an old Norse religion, sort of neo-paganism that the defense has associated with white supremacy, and certainly has been associated with white supremacy publicly, like, in by the Southern Poverty Law Center. That a group of them sacrificed the girls in some sort of religious sacrifice. And obviously that's generating quite a lot of headlines. It's a very unusual type of killing from what we can tell. It's not common that you have cults running around sacrificing children. It's just, I think that's fair to say. And this group is actually identified by name in the document. Yeah. And it's basically what the defense is saying is that there are runic symbols in the crime scene that speak to the Odinists, essentially. And I think what we're going to see this come down to is interpretation and whatever lens you're looking at it. If you're looking at it through an Odinist lens, which the defense is, then you're seeing the runes in the sticks that are posed over the bodies. You're seeing it in there's some blood splatter on one of the trees. Unfortunately, that's Libby's blood. And they claim that is in the shape of a rune. So that's what they're saying. I don't know this for a fact, but I have a feeling that prosecution's probably going to say that that's blood splatter and sticks. And there's no meaning behind them. So it's going to be the two interpretations. Whose is more credible to the jury?
Go ahead, Kevin. It seems like you're in thought or...
Oh, I was going to mention that they further identified an individual whose son was the boyfriend of Abby, and they indicated that they weren't sure that his alibi checked out. He said he was at work at the time, and they went so far as to say, well, even if he was at work, it could be a Charles Manson type of situation where he did not personally participate in the murders, but he somehow inspired them.
They basically confirmed his alibi that, yes, he was, at the very least, his card was clocked in from work from this time to that time. They kind of throw out, well, maybe someone clocked in for him. We're kind of getting into the realm of, is that likely? But they do note that the true ringleader doesn't have to be at the scene. So it seems like they're identifying that specific individual is very important for their theory, because he seems to be the connective tissue between a couple of different elements of this alleged group.
And what's this alleged group called? The Odist, or what was it?
I think they're calling them the Odinists.
Odinist, that was it, Odinist. So this was very surprising to me. It's not funny, it's just shocking. And
yes, but
it seems like the defense is almost strategically leaked information out over the last several months. I don't even want to say leaked. This thing is just part of a defense strategy. We talked about that last time we spoke, how the timing of this was very interesting, the confessions and all that. And it seems like this is just part of piecing together the defense before the trial even begins, or seemingly could be, if you understand what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely very aggressive messaging, because as we said, there's no reason for this to really be in a Frank's memorandum. So the fact they're putting it out there means, they want the public to have it. They want the media to engage with it and get it out there. Basically that narrative, which is that it's a cult of Odinists. And what they're actually arguing is even a bit more far-flung than that, because they're saying that there are Odinists in the prison where Richard Allen is being kept, who are not.
You always get, you go where I'm going to go, Anya, every time. I don't even have to segue either one of you to where I'm going. It's just some connection that we have. So I wanted to say that. Absolutely. You're going right into what I had thinking about next.
Yeah, this is, I mean, because I'm sure you picked up on this. This is where it gets really, I mean, because the other stuff is wild. I mean, I think that's fair to say. I'm not being flippant. It's just, wow, a cult of pagans did it. Now we're getting into actually the cult of pagans is also aligned with prison guards who are actively torturing Richard Allen and maybe forcing him to confess to the crimes or they will hurt his wife. So a lot to unpack there, but basically, you know, I think one thing I do want to say is that if anyone is associated with a white supremacist group who's working in a prison, that's obviously an unacceptable situation. We have been hearing from some people that there are people who are pagans and believe in Odin who are not white supremacists and just want to practice their religion. So we get into kind of a complicated area here because I think everyone can kind of condemn white supremacy, but also want people to be able to worship their own religion. So I don't know where any of this falls on the spectrum here, but that's just something that I'm thinking about. But yeah, the prison guard stuff is where you get in an interesting footnote. The attorneys did say that they had never heard from Richard Allen that he was being forced to confess to save his wife. They did clarify that in a footnote.
But they did indicate it was possible that that's why he confessed, because obviously that's something they have to explain. The fact that Richard Allen, we are told in court filings, he actually repeatedly confessed to this crime in a phone call with his wife. And the defense has to try to explain that. And this seems to be their explanation, that he may have been forced to do so by prison guards.
The last time we spoke, we actually discussed that in detail. And going back to what I just said, it seems awfully strategic, the release of information here. So we have the confession, and now we're lining it up with some of the whys of why there may have been a confession. This is certainly one of them. They've even gone to detail to say that they've been filming some of the sessions between the attorneys and Richard Allen and other different things that could be impactful on the court. This is a huge allegation for sure, and something they're going to have to investigate further. And hopefully this is something that could be proven to be true or false, whichever direction they go. It seems definitely something that could be investigated, though.
Yeah, I think, certainly, as we said, a prison is an environment where, you know, there's a lot of people of color who are incarcerated. And if you have people associated with any sort of white supremacist group who are in a position of power there, that's not okay. And so that, I think, should be taken seriously and investigated on its own, you know, where you have a possible link between people interested in Odinism who may have committed the Delphi murders and people, I mean, for folks who are not in Indiana, Westville is not close to Delphi. This is pretty far away. It's like
right.
The northern part of Indiana, the northmost part. And so it's not like you're having people from Delphi who are just like kind of associating with people in Westville necessarily. I don't know. It's definitely a lot of interesting things to unpack, but yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. There were some other things that came out of this, though, I think that would be very impactful on this case. One of which was the way there was a complaint on the way to which the evidence and things were collected. And that would be that would probably be, what we just spoke of kind of seems like a rabbit hole to me. But in fact, if some of this evidence gets tossed out, that would be very damning for prosecution.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I'll jump in there. I mean, the thing that really speaks to the Franks v. Delaware issues is the defense's allegations about Tony Liggett lying about witness statements. And if that's the case, and the PC and the probable cause affidavit for the search warrant was flawed, then you could have an impact. You could get the search warrant thrown out. If you lose the search warrant, you lose his gun. Therefore, you lose the bullet tying him to the scene. And you probably lose his confessions because he wouldn't have been in prison. if he hadn't been arrested over the search warrant, over the findings of the search warrant. So you lose the case against Richard Allen if that PCA is flawed.
You talked about some of the witnesses and all that. What exactly was said in this that happened? I know some of it was around the sketches of the suspect.
Yeah, there was a crucial witness who gave a description of the person she saw out on the trails that day, and the description she gave clearly does not fit Richard Allen. She describes him as having, I think, foofy or puffy hair.
Yeah, poofy hair.
And Richard Allen clearly does not have poofy or fluffy hair.
Vinnie Politan on Court TV calls him a young Justin Timberlake.
I heard that. Yes. I saw you guys both crack a smile on that one too.
Also, there was a witness who supposedly saw the car matching a description of the vehicle that Richard Allen owned in a parking lot at the time, but the description she gave does not match the description of Richard Allen's actual vehicle. So these things might suggest the person she saw, the vehicle they was not Richard Allen or Richard Allen's vehicle.
So if it turns out the law enforcement massaged witness statements to get the outcome they wanted, then that is really bad. That's right. I mean, I'm not just going off. But at the same time, we did notice that some of the language used by the defense to describe some of this, they were like, in 2017, this witness just said muddy, not bloody. And that kind of left the door open for us a little bit, where we're like, was there a 2018 statement where she said maybe it was blood? I don't know. I mean, that's just total speculation, but there could be some meeting in the middle where you can understand why the defense is making this argument, but you can also say that it's not necessarily fair to say that law enforcement is lying. Do you know what I'm saying? If that makes sense.
This feels like to me more of a normal route of what you would hear in trial, compared to the theory that we started off on this discussion on. These things are critical on any defense, right? I mean, immediately you want to be able to attack the integrity of the investigation, and this is absolutely huge. So it makes sense to me what you're saying. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree completely. The first 100-some pages were all about owedness, but then it really gets to this part about, well, maybe the witnesses didn't say what we were told. Maybe there's chain of custody issues with the evidence. And these are things more in line with what you would expect from a typical Franks motion.
I would also just say that a lot of pre-trial motions in most cases, even relatively high-profile cases, don't always get a ton of attention. And the Delphi is obviously different. Delphi, the media is ready at every turn about what the latest motion is. So there's a lot that can be lost or won on pretrial motions, I think, in this case. If Judge Gull's like, yeah, they totally messed up the PCA, I think the case against Richard Allen falls apart if you lose that search warrant. But if not, and it stays in, the bullet ultimately stays in, and the confessions stay in, then obviously that's a different landscape for defense to navigate.
Yeah, confession and the bullet casing placing you at the scene of the crime are definitely very powerful. A lot of things released in this. I will say that that like we just touched up on, that end part is definitely, it was interesting how it was loaded up, front loaded with a lot of this information on this cult religious organization, then kind of factually on the back, then the facts at the end to summarize these documents up. When something like this is normally released, is it normally this big?
It's not typically this long, and typically they focus not on alternate theories of the case as much as picking apart what law enforcement may have done to incorrectly in order to get the warrant. So basically, in general, they'd be more like the last 30 or so pages and less like the first 100 pages.
You all have, the both of you have spoke with a lot of people that probably know Richard Allen. And what's the general consensus you get from those conversations?
Basically, we've talked to people who grew up with him and people who worked with him in some capacity at the CVS in Peru, Indiana. And because he worked at the Peru, Indiana CVS before he worked at the Delphi one.
Gotcha.
Basically, what everyone has said is normal dude, just a normal, very quiet, not talking much, but had a sense of humor and, wasn't completely standoffish, but, generally not somebody who's going to get super personal with you at work, but somebody who you could count on. One person had more of a negative experience with him, but it was really in line with typical coworker stuff. They had a bit of a conflict. She felt he was micromanaging her, and there was just kind of not a good vibe there, but not in like a murder way, just really in like,
right.
I don't like to work with this guy way. That was really the only negative thing. Other people, who grew up with the family, grew up in Mexico, Indiana, which is right outside of Peru, Indiana. A lot of confusing names in Indiana. And moved to Delphi later on and had a child, had a daughter, was married for years to a woman named Kathy, who he was, with. I think they were together since high school. And, just kind of very much a guy who's under the radar. So, and that's what, people were always emailing us like, oh, find out how weird he was. And it's like, we're going to just report what people who knew him tell us. Like, we're not going to try to cherry pick to make him look sinister. If people are telling us he's a normal dude and that's what they saw, then that's what's going in the show.
But sometimes when there is a murder case and somebody is arrested and convicted, and we deep dive back into their past and we hear about things, a lot of the times this seems to be the case, just a normal person. You'll have a person here or there will share some ridiculous experience they had with them, or a negative one, I guess I'll say. But a lot of times it's just seemingly a normal person.
I will say, like, on the spectrum of, is he, sociable versus non-sociable, we have not been able to find a lot of people who knew him. And that's not the case for everybody that we've looked at on the show, And so, but then again, like, I'm probably somewhat introverted. I don't think there's a lot of people who really know me. And I don't think that's necessarily sinister, but it is something to be said here. I don't think he was Mr. out on the town, going around, hanging out, partying with everybody. I think he really strikes us as just more of a person who went to work, did his job, came home, was with the family. We've not talked to a lot of people who have said that they were his friend, or even people who lived in his neighborhood who knew him or the family particularly well. We have, that again, that doesn't mean anything. It's just a note. Although, frankly, sometimes when a high-profile thing like this happens, people who do know somebody, they don't really want to come forward because they don't want to be maligned. And there's such a undercurrent in this case where people try to make it into, everyone wants it to be bigger, bigger, bigger. It's not one guy. It's a sex cult. It's not one guy. It's a pedophile ring, So if you come forward and say, Richard Allen was my buddy, you're going to be grouped into that. And I can understand if some people are like, I don't want to put myself through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Understandably so. I don't know if this was on the same Court TV episode that you guys were on. There was an individual on there that dropped a bombshell of a statement, being that there were... Yeah. So the recordings is famously heard around the world, guys down the hill. This individual, I don't remember the person's name, flat out said there's two different people saying that. So one person's saying guys, other person's saying down the hill. I don't know how he came to that conclusion, but to summarize this document, they kind of went off on a lengthy statement about how it would be impossible for Richard Allen to let's just say physically do this, right? And I'll give you some examples on that. They touched up on, we stated a little bit earlier, but just some of the crime scene even. Abby's hands were clean, no blood. Abby's feet were clean, no blood, other than blood found around Abby's neck area. I guess I don't want to read it all, but it goes in this huge detail about how much work for one person, particularly Richard Allen, would have gone into performing these murders. Not only that, they talk about, I believe they use the word hiking across the river, all the ground that would have to be covered, and just the amount of time and work that would go into this time span. Am I accurately describing how this summarizes all this? And they're trying to end on that note, saying a little Richard Allen wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah, he's just a little short.
I threw that opinion in on myself because they had to make sure to mention how small in stature of his height he was.
He's a very short man, and we've seen him in court, and he definitely is not a tall man.
Right.
I think, to me, it's like, sometimes, when people emphasize that so much, I'm kind of like, he had if he's guilty, whoever has a gun on two teenage girls, and I don't really know how much height matters at that point, but that's just me. That person I'm not even going to say their name on this because they do not deserve any attention.
I don't even know their name. If that makes you feel any better.
They're not a credible person in our view. We've had dealings with them, and some of the antics behind the scenes you wouldn't believe, to be frank. So I don't believe a thing. If that person says, it's raining out, I'm going to look out the window, and I don't trust anything they say. There's so many people in this case who just use it, for getting on TV and saying whatever. So that's fun. But I would say that, I think the defense made some compelling points about how much work would have been done at the crime scene. I tended to view it like, as a writer, I feel like I could make a lot of things sound a lot more involved. Like if I was to narrate your morning, Jeff, I could write down everything in its own little paragraph. And first Jeff got some coffee, or first he turned the coffee maker on. Then he it would just be, it would make it sound like you were a very busy person when maybe in reality, it's just part of your routine. You do it. That being said, it is a lot to do. He's a middle-aged man. He's not exactly in the prime of his life, physicality wise. So I think it was a fair point for the defense to bring up. And I know it struck Kevin as wow, I think it would be hard for one person to do that. It struck me as more I think somebody can do that, but I don't know.
And of course, after Allen was arrested last year, in the press conference where that was announced, prosecutor Nick McClelland actually said directly that we think it's possible other people are involved in this. So when you leave,
which is why they wanted not the information to get out, right? That was basically one of the reasons they wanted this to be sealed a little bit more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they wanted, the investigation is ongoing, so we can't release this information without compromising the investigation. So we have to assume they mean what they say, and if their theory was that there's more than one person involved, there was reason to believe that. And one of the reasons to believe that, apparently, is just because of how bizarre the crime scene was and how long, and how long and the effort involved in doing all of this.
But that was okay. So them describing this religious cult and all that is going into to try to make you, and the defense is doing their job. Let's just say that. I'm not knocking the defense. That is going into to convince you that these leaves, these limbs, these tree limbs, they meant something. Everything meant something. Therefore, it would make that event impossible to do in that time frame with one person. See what I'm saying? Obviously strategically done, because let's just say these were just trying to cover up somebody just tried to cover up a body real quick. That is a lot different than saying somebody's strategically trying to set up I don't remember the word ruin or whatever we used, but it's completely different. And you have to paint that picture for believability for the case of two people doing it. I don't say you have to, but it makes it more than likely with two people to do it if the events that took place were that much more detailed and lengthy in nature. You can interpret it in many different ways, like Anya just said, and she feels one thing, you feel the other way. But to me, they have to paint, and they went the really long way to do it. But the most important part of this document was where we're at here at the end. Why something like that would have taken that amount of time, or why would it possibly be that you could absolutely prove him guilty, right? I think all that plays into factor here as all these things were released in this document.
Yeah, and I'll say that I think that it's been a very effective narrative so far, because we get a lot of messages from people who are curious about the case, and I think something about the Odinist angle has fired up a lot of people. They're stalking the Facebooks of the men who've been named as Odinists. They are engaging with it in a way. They are basically saying, I mean, we're getting emails from people who are trying to like thread the needle and say, well, could Richard Allen have been an Odinist? And it's like, okay, I mean, no, because I think the defense would be crazy to do that. If there's any like inclination that this man is an Odinist, they're not going to go with that theory. You know, they're smart. These are smart attorneys. They're not going to shoot themselves in the foot like that. And also it's also shows me that people are just kind of accepting the defense's characterization of the crime scene on face value, because it's like, okay, we have to get around this Odinist thing. How do you know? And it's like, I think that's very interesting, and it shows the power of the narrative here.
Do you think the overwhelming amount of information is part of the strategy too? And I'll give you an example. Yeah, I don't want to say it's exact. This is what it reminds me of, my opinion. I used to work with this coworker, and whenever we had a project, he would go in great length to describe how it was impossible to do the project. I mean, he would give out so much information on how it would be impossible to achieve a goal of a project. It'd overwhelm you with sometimes what felt like irrelevant information in an attempt to derail the project. Does that make sense what I'm saying to you? Again, I'm not saying this is your guys' opinion. It's mine. So in a court case, Kevin, you're a lawyer. I know you do investigative journalism for these types of things, and you have been. Is it common to just, I'm going to throw everything at you to try to overwhelm you with the purpose of doubt or trying to raise doubt in your mind?
Yeah, I'd say so. And I'd say it's often a very effective strategy, because sometimes the more information you give people, the more confused they become trying to make sense of it all. There's details in here about people allegedly confessing to their involvement in the crime. And the typical person, when they hear that somebody confessed, they assume, well, that must be an accurate confession, because why would they confess if they weren't involved in the crime? And so then people just try to make it all fit in together like some sort of jigsaw puzzle. And it's not a jigsaw puzzle. It's real life. It's a complicated case. It just causes confusion. And in this case, confusion helps the defense.
Absolutely. Man, I know you guys don't feel, I don't want to keep you on here much longer, but just two more things. One of them being, what do you feel like this information getting out right now before trial? What are the pros and cons, to sum this up, of what it could do at this trial? Pros being obviously on both the defense and prosecution, and same with the cons. But this information getting out early, what does this do to the trial, in your opinion?
I think a pro for the defense is that their narrative gets some time to take root, for lack of a better term. They get that out there. Maybe people are looking for other Odinists in the Delphi area, and they can expand that theory with the help of the public. And they're kind of putting their line in the sand of like, okay, here's what we think happened. So I think that's a positive for them. I think the negative for defense, I suppose, maybe people get used to it, and novelty is a huge thing in the Delphi case. Everybody wants something new, so but I think it's an interesting enough theory that it's not going to be boring. So I don't know how much that a negative would be. What do you think about for the prosecution, Kevin?
I think for the prosecution, the biggest negative impact is that this document, if you take it seriously, it strongly suggests that the investigation was fatally flawed, and that the investigators made some serious errors. And if that idea gets into the bloodstream, people are going to assume, even when they hear compelling information from the prosecution, well, maybe they're not telling us the whole story, or maybe this is just another one of their mistakes. And that is something the prosecution has to deal with. They're going to have to come out and defend the integrity of their investigation and the integrity of the men who led it.
I'm going to say the flip side for the prosecution is that if they're able to debunk some of this publicly in a filing before trial and maybe indicate areas where the defense overstepped with their statements, I think that that's a ding to the defense's credibility, frankly. So, or you might get into a situation where it's sort of a gray area where both sides are saying they're the liar. And as the public, you have to be like, okay, like, I don't know who's telling the truth. So that's kind of, I think, where it stands. It's a lot of, slinging allegations at one another's credibility.
Yeah, with the whole purpose to be to really question this investigation, which has been scrutinized by yourselves, by others, by the world in great detail. And this would be, like, for example, we didn't get into it, we won't, but the description on how the tree limbs were cut and how the tree limbs weren't collected. All of this information being released with the intent of really making you question I don't even want to say integrity. I just want to say, I guess, how much you could truly rely on the skill set of the people that perform this investigation. Not even negatively, maybe just like purposely doing it, right? Just more or less how professionally there were gaps and opportunities. So I think the intent obviously is to try to highlight that. Last question for you. You guys stick to a pretty tight script on your podcast. You stick to a pretty tight script on Court TV. I want to take this opportunity here for you to share any other feelings or thoughts you have on the case. And I'll start out. You certainly don't have to, but for me, it's kind of like sad because the further we get into this, and it's just going to get worse, the further we get away, the more we dive into these details, the further we get away from the victims, the true victims of the case. That's my thoughts, just to summarize. When I look at all this information in front of me, we start to victimize Richard Allen. We start bringing all these other people. You talked about these names that released. You just start watering it down more and more people get impacted, and it just take it away from the original victims of this gruesome crime.
Very well said. I feel like there's a movie that always comes to mind for me with this case. And the movie subject is not about a murder or anything like that. But I just think the environment around this case reminds me a lot. And I'm not going to do any spoilers, but people should watch it. It's a Billy Wilder directed film. It's called Ace in the Hole. And it's about a newspaper man who's very jaded, very cynical. And he happens upon a story where a man is trapped in a cave. And it's about the media circus that ensues. And it is, to me, I watched it and felt like so dead inside because I was like, yeah, nothing has changed. It's the most kind of disturbingly accurate portrait of what can happen in a media circus. And unfortunately, I think a lot of things going on with Delphi, they're hallmarks of that film. So I would recommend for all your listeners to check it out. It's bleak as heck. But as far as my own feelings about all this, without going off the deep end and going unhinged, excuse me, which I'm sure a lot of people want us to do, but
it wasn't my intent. I've just literally, you guys stick to a really tight script. You don't share your opinion, which is fine. Okay, you do a little bit, but that's not the intent of your platform. My platform here, I'm giving you a few minutes, not to do something you're uncomfortable with or to try to put you on the spot, but to give you a few minutes to do something that you wouldn't necessarily take the time to do on television.
Like a nice steam pressure release. I would say for me, people just need to stop being weather vanes on it. We're all waiting for information, and the amount of times, people, I feel like when Alan got arrested, people were like, he's the guilty, get him. And it's like, okay, he's just been arrested, fella. Let's just see what the case against him is, see what his attorneys have to say. And then, they release photos of him looking, disheveled and not in good spirits in prison. And then, oh my gosh, he's being tortured. And then it goes back to, oh, well, he confessed. He must be guilty. And it's like, I just feel like this roller coaster is just so exhausting. And I just feel like the public, I'd love to see more people just saying, okay, let's take in all this information and like assess it and think about it. And there's no rush to have a hard opinion on anything in this case either way. It's ultimately going to come down to the jury, and that's what's important. But I just feel like there's almost like a kind of a impulse to like kind of everyone be a take factory on social media, and I kind of just feel like there's no ultimate point in that, and there's certainly no point, if the prosecution's slinging stuff at the defense, I think we need to wait till the defense responds before we make up our minds, and same with vice versa. So I think that's where I am. I think the rush to judgment can be somewhat problematic at times.
Yeah, I've been doing
that. Do you have any? I just went off in front of Jeff, and
right.
Now you have to do one too.
Yeah, it's very striking. People like immediate gratification. They want immediate answers. And so when something like this comes out and is revealed, they want it to be definitive, and they want to be able to believe it without having to do any further reading or investigation. And unfortunately, it's a boring thing to say. It's a dull thing to say. But before you can come to any final conclusions, you really do have to get the other side of the story, and you have to wait. And we certainly hope that the prosecution files a substantive response to this soon. And we hope it's not sealed, because we think people have a right to see it, and so they can evaluate the work their public officials have been doing in their name on this case.
Well said. And I appreciate both of your time as always. This has been a fun segment of Indiana Stories. You can check out our previous conversations. They're all on there. We haven't broke it down in long form. What we have done is a pretty good job of a couple probably hours of listening time that would summarize this case really well without going into the greatest detail. If you want to hear more detail, obviously check out the Murder Sheet podcast, murdersheetpodcast.com. You guys have a really neat Facebook group that I'm a part of. So I think if anybody's interested in that, you should look into that. And anything else you guys want to plug or share? What did I miss here?
No, you did it. That was perfect. And yeah, just check out our Facebook group. It's really pretty chill, I think, for a true crime Facebook group, but just don't fight.
I'm in a couple of these Delphi Facebook groups, by the way. And yeah, they're very different. They vary in difference from group to group in comparison to your guys'. I will say that.
Yeah, we try to do something a little different.
We have an excellent
moderator. And people get mad at us because they like go in and act up and then get kicked out. And they're like, you kicked us out. And we're like, we leave everything to our mod, and she boots first and asks questions later. So she's awesome.
Yeah, you got to nip the bud early, I guess, and get ahead of it. And I will say again, thank you guys for the manner you've handled this, the integrity you've put into this, and the way you conduct yourselves all the time on your podcast, on television, on social media, as you've had your, let's just say, arguments with different true crime podcasters throughout the years. You guys have always handled it really well in comparison to the way they handled it, even though, to be honest, a lot of them do have some pretty good content and are much more popular than you guys. But you guys have taken the higher route, and I mean, I guess you know when to pick your battles, and I really appreciate the professionalism that you guys put behind your work. And you guys have faced a lot of scrutiny from a lot of, I'm not saying you're not popular, but these are some big platform people that have gone after you guys, and you've just handled it with the utmost importance, that importance being the integrity and just focusing on the investigation itself, and not a lot of the other drama that comes along with it, if I just made any sense with that rambling there.
We so appreciate that. That's very Thank you, Jeff. I used to joke to Kevin, that cheesy Imagine Dragons song that comes on, Everyone Wants to Be My Enemy? When it was a certain period in time where I was Kevin, like, we should make this our theme song.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's we just try to, we don't try to start drama, but sometimes it happens and you just got to deal with it. But I would say a lot of people we've been able to meet, like yourself, and just a community of people who really, I feel like, care about covering crime in a responsible and thoughtful manner. And we just have been very gratified to meet kindred spirits like yourself.
Kevin, you want to leave us with a really impactful Stoic quote? I'm just kidding, man. I won't put you on the spot like that. You're sick.
Thank you.
You both are sick, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Check out the Murder Sheet podcast and back episodes of this podcast. Thank you both, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
You too,
Thank you.
Jeff. Great. Bye.